Hello there folks, thank you for joining me once again in the Football Games Room and welcome to Topical Teamsheets, the ultimate squad building show. In this week's episode, I'll be revealing my picks for the Premier League injury prone 11. Kicking off then with the goalkeeper, Jack Butland, who should really have stayed at home when England travelled to Germany for a friendly back in 2016. Not just because he should never have been in the team in the first place, but also because he ended up suffering a fractured ankle, which would keep him sidelined for a staggering 392 days. He's also faced a battle to stay fit in more recent times, with muscle injuries and a broken finger amongst many of the reasons he's been out of action. First up in defence is Jonathan Woodgate, and I can safely say that the fact that he ended up missing the entirety of his first season at Real Madrid through injury is nowhere near as surprising as the fact that they actually paid money to sign him in the first place, given his injury history at both Leeds and Newcastle. It also perhaps comes as no surprise to learn that the collection of injuries that he accumulated whilst at Tottenham meant that he was out for a combined total of just over a year and a half, which works out at about half the time he was at White Hart Lane. Next to Woodgate is his former Spurs teammate Ledley King, who was cited by Arsenal legend Thierry Henry as the best defender he'd ever come up against, which I think is a bit of an insult to Anthony Gardner and Eric Edman, but that's perhaps a rant for another time. But regardless, Henry's kind words certainly go some way to demonstrating King's ability and the heights that he could have reached had it not been for the variety of injuries, primarily to his knee, that ended up dogging the second half of his 13-year professional career, during which he passed the 30 Premier League appearance mark in only one season. Our third defender is the former Manchester City captain Vincent Kompany, whose rather giant forehead is apparently not the result of a childhood head injury. It would indeed be injuries to his legs that would see him miss a total of almost 2.5 years during his 11-season stay at Eastlands. A series of muscle strains and knee injuries would keep his appearance count below 20 during his final 4 seasons in England, dropping as low as 11 in 2016-17, by which point he'd already suffered 37 injuries. Rounding off the defence is Luke Shaw. His injury history, combined with his early rise into professional football, makes you forget that he's still only 24, though I suspect that after that wince-worthy double leg fracture he received in the Champions League against PSV back in 2015, which saw him out of action for 11 months, coupled with the foot and groin injuries that rendered him unavailable for 25 games in the 2016-17 season, his legs probably resemble those of someone who's nearer to 94. The first of the midfield three is Darren Anderton, whose most noteworthy career stat is that his final 5 England caps were earned under 5 different managers, due to the frequency of his spells on the sidelines. Having already developed the nickname, or should I say sick name, Sick Note, by the age of 20, which to be fair to him would have been retirement age in the Middle Ages, he was never really able to realise his full potential, despite showing glimpses during his 12 years at Tottenham. Next to Anderton is Abou Diaby, who actually suffered more injuries than he scored Premier League goals during his 9 years at Arsenal, including a fractured ankle, which kept him out of the 2006 Champions League final, though I highly doubt Arsene Wenger cites his absence as the reason for the Gunners' defeat. In fact, so frequent were his injuries that he never managed to complete a full season for Arsenal, only making more than 20 league appearances for the Gunners in 2 seasons, with his final 4 campaigns seeing him rack up a pretty disheartening total of just 22 appearances in all competitions. Running off the midfield is a player whose proneness to injury was such that it's earned itself its own section on his Wikipedia page, Owen Hargreaves, whose recurring knee injury would restrict him to a total of just 5 appearances in all competitions in his final 3 of 4 seasons at Manchester United. Though perhaps the nadir of his career came in November 2010, when, after making his first start in 777 days, he came off injured after barely 5 minutes, being replaced by none other than Bebe. The first of the strikers is Andy Carroll, who was criticised by former West Ham boss Sam Allardyce for failing to stay fit during his time as a Hammer, claiming that he lacked self-discipline. Because if there's any manager I'd go to for advice on how to stay fit, it's Big Sam. Or better still, Carroll's current manager Steve Bruce. Something that might back up Allardyce's claim, however, is the fact that Carroll has failed to hit double figures in one season for any club since his first spell at Newcastle almost a decade ago, which is down to a combination of the series of heel, ankle, groin and foot injuries that he's suffered, alongside several bouts of poor form. Alongside Carroll is his former England teammate Danny Welbeck, who from youth has suffered with an inflammation of the knee caused by a disease called Osgood-Schlatter, which sounds a bit like the obscure player from the 1940s that your granddad would always go on about. Having had early career loans at both Preston and Sunderland cut short through injury, it was really his 5 years at Arsenal that saw him sidelined the most. In his return match after 8 months out with a knee injury back in 2017, Arsene Wenger claimed that Welbeck could still have a dream career, which I would agree with, just not as a footballer. The final name in the starting 11 is Michael Owen, who, during the latter parts of his career, really couldn't catch a break, except when it came to his legs. A matter of months after arriving at Newcastle from Real Madrid, he broke a metatarsal bone, keeping him out for 4 months, and shortly after returning, he then tore the ACL in his right knee whilst playing for England at the 2006 World Cup, resulting in a year-long battle between the St James's Park Club and FIFA and the FA, with the Magpies ultimately receiving £10 million in compensation. Having won 2 Premier League Golden Boots before he'd even left his teens, and the Ballon d'Or in 2001, a hamstring injury would end up plaguing a number of his formative years at Liverpool, and that carried over to his subsequent spells at Real and Newcastle, as well as his final 2 clubs, Manchester United and Stoke. So then, on to the manager. But before that, a quick question. What does it say about a manager when the only time his team finishes above 3rd in the table is when, for the majority of the season, he's not actually been managing it? Well, that's exactly what happened to Gerard Houllier when he was rushed to hospital at half-time during a match between Leeds and his Liverpool side back in October 2001. It was discovered that the Frenchman had a heart condition and would be forced to take a 5-month leave of absence, eventually returning in March 2002. 9 years later, now at Aston Villa, he was hospitalised again with health problems and was forced to effectively retire from football management. And finally, the subs bench. The number 2 goalkeeper is Ben Foster, who was claimed by former Watford gaffer Aidy Boothroyd to be better than Edwin van der Sar, also believing that he would go on to be the best keeper in the world. Now, I'm not sure whether Boothroyd was suffering with some kind of head injuries himself at the time, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say it's definitely Foster's recurring cruciate ligament problem that's prevented his big money move to Real Madrid. The backup defenders are Manchester United duo Marcos Rojo and Phil Jones. In fairness to Rojo, I don't think you can actually tell whether or not he's injured when he's playing, whilst Jones suffered a facial injury back in December 2011, which it looks like he's still suffering from. The midfield substitutes are Kieran Dyer and Jamie Redknapp. Despite suffering long-term injuries during his time at West Ham and QPR, perhaps Dyer should have faked an injury when he got into an on-pitch fight with Newcastle teammate Lee Bowyer to save any further blushes. Whilst Redknapp's surgery for his recurring knee problem caused him to miss the entirety of Liverpool's treble-winning season, even going as far as doing a John Terry before even John Terry did it, by lifting the trophy in the FA Cup final despite not playing a single second. And finally, the attacking reinforcements, Dean Ashton and Daniel Sturridge. Although I don't find the fact that Ashton was forced into early retirement amusing, the fact that it was caused by Sean Wright-Phillips, who broke his ankle in a bad tackle, most certainly is, given how the only other thing the poor guy managed to break during his career was a record for the biggest rip-off in Chelsea's history. The fact, meanwhile, that the final 2 clubs Sturridge signed for were West Brom and Trabzonspor probably goes some way to detailing just how low his career has sunk in recent years. Even though he picked up the majority of his injuries whilst at Liverpool, it's also quite funny that he went down with a hamstring injury just 3 minutes into his 3rd West Brom appearance. So that rounds off the Premier League injury-prone 11. As always, comment which players you would and wouldn't have included. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop it a like, and if you'd like to see more from the Football Games Room, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Topical Teamsheets will return next week with the hotly anticipated Chelsea banter signings 11. So have a good week, and I'll see you then.